Girl falls into lion enclosure and father tries to save her. The lion's reaction is shocking, Pierre. Morgan would later describe it as the longest 17 minutes of his life, what had begun as a perfect Saturday morning outing with his 5-year-old daughter. Emma at the Oakwood Wildlife Sanctuary quickly descended into every parent's worst nightmare when a momentary lapse in attention allowed Emma to slip from his grasp and into unimaginable danger. I'm Diane Reynolds, senior correspondent for the Chronicle Herald. I've covered natural disasters, armed conflicts, and countless human tragedies in my 23 years of journalism. But nothing prepared me for the raw emotional intensity of interviewing the participants in what many are calling the miracle at Oakwood, an incident that challenged our understanding of predator behavior and raised serious questions about safety standards at wildlife facilities across the nation. The Oakwood Wildlife Sanctuary, located just outside Riverside, California, houses animals rescued from illegal private ownership, defunct circuses, and roadside attractions. Unlike traditional zoos, its focus is rehabilitation rather than exhibition. Most animals are destined for larger sanctuaries or, when possible, released back into protected habitats. The sanctuary operates on limited funding, relying heavily on donations and volunteers to maintain its facilities. Among its residents is Zubi, a 12-year-old male lion confiscated from a private collector in Nevada 3 years ago. Before his rescue, Zubi spent 9 years confined to a cage measuring just 12 by 20 feet, less than a tenth of the minimum space recommended for captive lions. His journey to Oakwood was intended as a temporary placement before transferred to a larger sanctuary in South Africa. That Saturday, April 12th, began like any other at Oakwood. Staff veterinarian Dr. James Hannigan had completed Zubi's monthly health check that morning, noting in his report that the lion appeared calm but slightly lethargic, likely due to the unusually warm spring temperatures. For Pierre Morgan, a single father and elementary school teacher, the visit to Oakwood was a reward for Emma's improved behavior at school. Recently diagnosed with ADHD, Emma had struggled with classroom disruptions until a new medication regimen had begun showing positive results. The trip represented not just a fun outing, but a milestone in their ongoing adjustment to Emma's diagnosis. She was doing so well, Pierre told me, his voice catching as he recounted the events from his hospital room 3 days after the incident. Her teacher called specifically to tell me how focused she'd been all week. I wanted to celebrate that. They arrived at Oakwood around 10:30 a.m., joining a modest weekend crowd of approximately 40 visitors. The sanctuary's limited operating budget meant minimal staffing. Just 2 keepers on duty for the entire facility, with volunteers helping to guide visitors and answer questions. Security footage would later confirm that only 1 volunteer was stationed near the big cat enclosures that morning, splitting her attention between 3 separate viewing areas. Pierre and Emma spent nearly an hour observing smaller animals before making their way to the big cat section around 11 to 45 a meter. Zubi's enclosure featured a visitor viewing area with a 4-foot concrete wall topped by 8 feet of heavy gauge fencing. A narrow concrete walkway ran between this barrier and a secondary fence, creating a 3-foot safety buffer zone that visitors were strictly prohibited from entering. Multiple signs warned, "Danger, do not cross barrier and stay behind yellow line." Emma, excited to see the lion, pressed against the outer fence while Pierre checked the educational placard about Zubi's rescue, when his phone buzzed with a text message from Emma's mother regarding an upcoming custody exchange. He looked down for approximately 12 seconds. In that brief window, Emma, with the remarkable agility of a 5-year-old, managed to squeeze through a gap where the concrete walkway met the viewing platform, a maintenance access point that should have been secured but had been left slightly ajar after morning cleaning. Security footage shows the small girl slipping through this opening like water, finding the path of least resistance, dropping approximately 5 feet into the buffer zone. Pierre only realized what had happened when another visitor gasped. He looked up to find Emma no longer beside him, and then spotted her picking herself up inside the buffer zone directly between the visitor barrier and the habitat fence. "Emma, don't move," he shouted immediately, looking for sanctuary staff. The volunteer assigned to the area had momentarily stepped away to help an elderly visitor, leaving no immediate assistance available. Emma, startled by her father's shout and disoriented from the fall, did what many frightened children would do. She ran. But instead of running toward the visitor area, she ran parallel to the fence, searching for a way out of the narrow corridor. Security footage shows Pierre rushing to the edge of the viewing platform, frantically scanning for any sanctuary staff while trying to direct Emma back toward a maintenance gate located 30 feet along the buffer zone. 2 other visitors immediately began calling for help on their phones. Zubi, who had been resting in his covered shelter area, emerged at the commotion. Footage shows the massive lion, weighing approximately 420 pounds, moving with surprising speed toward the fence line where Emma was running. I saw the lion coming and my mind just went blank, Pierre recalled. Everything they tell you about staying calm in emergencies, it all disappeared. I was just screaming Emma's name. What happened next defied the expectations of everyone present. Emma, reaching the end of the buffer zone and finding no exit, tripped over an uneven section of concrete and fell forward, striking her head against the habitat fence. The impact wasn't severe enough to cause serious injury, but it disoriented the already frightened child, who crumpled to the ground, crying. Zubi reached the fence exactly where Emma had fallen. The lion's massive paws could easily have reached through the gaps in the habitat fencing. Gaps designed to prevent a full-grown lion from squeezing through, but large enough for a paw to extend into the buffer zone. The distance between Emma and the powerful predator was less than 3 feet. Pierre, witnessing his daughter lying vulnerable with a lion approaching, made the decision that would later be debated by safety experts and parents alike. He jumped down into the buffer zone himself. I didn't think about it, he later explained. It wasn't courage. Any parent would have done the same thing. My baby was in danger. Security footage captures Pierre dropping the 8 feet from the viewing platform to the buffer zone, injuring his ankle in the process, but immediately limping toward Emma, placing himself between his daughter and the lion. By this point, Zubi was directly opposite them at the fence line. The lion's behavior in the next moments would astonish both witnesses and later wildlife experts reviewing the footage. Instead of displaying aggressive behaviors, lunging, roaring, or pawing at the fence, Zubi simply sat down, his massive head tilted slightly as he observed the human drama unfolding before him. It was the strangest thing, said Michael Kemp, a visitor who recorded portions of the incident on his phone. That lion was just watching them, almost like he was curious rather than hunting. He wasn't doing any of the stalking behaviors you'd expect. Pierre, however, had no way of knowing the lion's intentions. With single-minded focus, he reached Emma and gathered her into his arms, his injured ankle making it impossible to carry her. This is when he realized their predicament. They were trapped in the buffer zone with no immediate way out, his injury preventing any attempt to lift Emma back up to the viewing platform, and the maintenance gate locked with no staff in sight. I just held her against the outer fence as far from the lion as possible, Pierre recounted. And I was screaming for help, but everyone seemed frozen, just watching or filming. I remember thinking, this can't be how we die. Not like this. Zubi's continued passive behavior bought precious time. The lion remained seated, occasionally blinking slowly, a behavior cat owners might recognize as non-threatening, while keeping his gaze fixed on the pair. Pierre maintained his protective position, using his body to shield Emma, while visitors finally began coordinating efforts to find sanctuary staff. It would take another 3 minutes before the first response arrived. Volunteer coordinator Sandra Mitchell, who had been working in the reptile house when alerted by frantic visitors. Her arrival marked the beginning of what would become a carefully orchestrated rescue operation. Sandra immediately radioed for backup and located the emergency keys for the maintenance gate. However, standard protocol for animal emergencies presented a terrible dilemma. Opening the gate while Zubi was near the fence violated safety procedures designed to prevent escape or injury. Dr. Hannigan, arriving minutes later, quickly assessed the situation. The lion's body language was remarkably non-aggressive, he noted in his incident report. He displayed none of the pre-attack indicators we trained for. No tail swishing, no fixed stare, no crouched position. He was simply observing. This professional assessment, combined with the growing concern for Emma, who had begun showing signs of shock, led to the decision to attempt immediate extraction while keeping tranquilizer guns ready if Zubi's demeanor changed. Sanctuary Director Wilson arrived with the tranquilizer equipment. Headkeeper Marcus Rodriguez approached the maintenance gate with the emergency keys. What followed was a tense, carefully choreographed operation as Rodriguez unlocked the gate while Wilson and Hannigan positioned themselves with tranquilizers aimed at Zubi. As Rodriguez slowly opened the gate, making minimal noise, Pierre began inching toward it, half carrying, half dragging Emma despite his injured ankle. The distance, approximately 20 feet, seemed insurmountable under the circumstances. Each shuffling step accompanied by the silent prayer that Zubi would maintain his inexplicable calm. Remarkably, the lion remained seated, his attention now divided between the humans in the buffer zone and the activity at the habitat fence, where sanctuary staffs were positioning themselves. Wildlife experts would later suggest that this division of attention may have prevented the predatory focus that typically precedes attacks. It was like watching a bomb being defused, Michael Kemp recalled of the agonizing extraction. Everyone was holding their breath. The only sounds were the father's labored breathing and the girl's whimpering. When Pierre finally reached the gate, Rodriguez helped pull Emma through first, then supported Pierre as he limped to safety. The moment they cleared the buffer zone, Wilson immediately ordered the gates secured, and staff began emergency medical assessment. Emma had suffered minor abrasions from her fall but showed signs of emotional shock. Pierre's ankle was later diagnosed as a grade 2 sprain with torn ligaments. But the physical injuries paled in comparison to the psychological trauma both had experienced. Trauma that would be compounded in the days ahead as video of the incident, captured by multiple visitors, spread across social media platforms and news outlets worldwide. News of the incident at Oakwood spread with the viral efficiency unique to the digital age. By Sunday morning, smartphone footage captured by visitors had accumulated millions of views across social media platforms, with mainstream media outlets quickly incorporating the dramatic clips into their broadcasts. The most widely shared video, shot by college student Alyssa Chun, captured the heart-stopping moments of Pierre's leap into the buffer zone and his protective huddle around Emma as Zubi watched from mere feet away. Public reactions split along predictable lines. Parenting forums erupted with heated debates about supervision and responsibility. Wildlife conservationists and zoo safety experts issued statements highlighting the incident as evidence for stricter regulation of sanctuary designs. Social media churned with everything from thoughtful analysis to outright conspiracy theories about Zubi's unexpected behavior. Meanwhile, Pierre and Emma Morgan were admitted to Riverside Community Hospital. Pierre for treatment of his ankle injury and Emma for observation due to concerns about post-traumatic stress. The hospital administration, recognizing the media frenzy developing around the case, implemented privacy protocols typically reserved for high-profile patients. Dr. Kenneth Bradshaw, the emergency physician who treated them, noted the contrast between Pierre's physical and emotional states upon admission. His ankle injury was significant but straightforward, torn ligaments requiring immobilization and eventual physical therapy. But psychologically, he was experiencing acute stress reaction. He kept repeating, he didn't attack. Why didn't he attack? It seemed almost as important to him as the fact that they had survived. This question, why Zubi hadn't behaved as expected, quickly became central to both public fascination and scientific inquiry. By Sunday afternoon, wildlife behavior experts from institutions across the country were contacting Oakwood, requesting access to Zubi's complete records and the unedited security footage. At Oakwood itself, the sanctuary had temporarily closed to the public while USDA inspectors and local animal control officials conducted a thorough safety assessment. Director Margaret Wilson faced the dual challenges of cooperating with investigators while managing a tsunami of media inquiries. Dr. James Hannigan, who had conducted Zubi's health check just hours before the incident, became the sanctuary's point person for addressing questions about the lion's behavior. In his preliminary assessment shared with investigators, he outlined several possible explanations for Zubi's uncharacteristic restraint. First, we need to acknowledge that Zubi's background is atypical for captive lions, Hannigan explained. He spent 9 years in close proximity to humans in his previous inappropriate captive situation. While this doesn't create domestication, it may have reduced his perception of humans as prey. Hannigan also noted the significance of Zubi's physical state that morning. The health check revealed slightly elevated body temperature consistent with the unseasonably warm weather. Lions are ambush predators who conserve energy, and Zubi may simply have been too thermally stressed to engage in predatory behavior. A third factor, which would become increasingly significant as the investigation progressed, was the possibility that Zubi recognized the difference between adult and child humans. We've observed that captive big cats often respond differently to children than adults, possibly due to size differentials or behavioral cues, Hannigan noted. While these professional assessments circulated among experts, public discourse took a decidedly less scientific turn. By Monday morning, Zubi the Guardian Lion was trending across platforms with users attributing various motivations to the lion, ranging from spiritual protection to animal empathy. Against this backdrop of public speculation and professional investigation, I secured an interview with Pierre Morgan on Tuesday morning, 3 days after the incident. The hospital had arranged for us to speak in a small conference room away from the regular patient areas, with a child psychologist present to monitor the conversation for anything that might further traumatize Pierre or Emma, who was coloring quietly in a corner with headphones on. Pierre appeared exhausted with dark circles under his eyes contrasting sharply with the hospital's harsh fluorescent lighting. His right ankle was heavily wrapped and elevated on a chair beside him. What struck me most, however, was the clarity in his gaze, a focused intensity that belied his physical state. "I want to get the story right," he said before I could ask my first question. "Not just for me, but for that lion. Everyone's making up their own version of what happened. The truth matters." Over the next hour, Pierre recounted the events with remarkable precision. When I asked about his decision to jump into the buffer zone, a choice many armchair commentators had criticized as reckless, His response was immediate and unapologetic. There was no decision. You see your child in danger. You act. Anyone suggesting they would carefully weigh options in that moment has never been apparent. He paused, then added, "The only real choice I made was placing myself between Emma and the lion. That was conscious. If something was going to be attacked, it would be me, not her." The most revealing moment came when I asked about his repeated question in the emergency room. Why hadn't Zubi attacked? "It haunts me," he admitted, lowering his voice so Emma wouldn't hear despite her headphones. "Keep replaying it, looking for what I missed. Wild predators don't just watch. They attack vulnerability. Everything I've ever learned says we should have been attacked. I'm grateful. God, I'm so grateful. But I don't understand it." By Wednesday, 5 days after the incident, several significant developments had occurred that would shape the narrative moving forward. First, the USDA inspection had identified the unsecured maintenance access point as a critical safety violation and issued preliminary findings, requiring the sanctuary to implement comprehensive barrier upgrades before reopening to the public. Second, Pierre Morgan had retained legal counsel but made the unexpected decision not to pursue legal action against Oakwood. His attorney issued a statement explaining that Pierre recognizes this incident resulted from a unique confluence of factors rather than gross negligence and believes that punitive measures would undermine the sanctuary's valuable work. The third and perhaps most scientifically significant development came from Dr. Caroline Abernathy, a renowned big cat behaviorist from University of California, Davis, who had been granted access to Zubi's complete records and the security footage. Her preliminary assessment introduced a compelling theory that would ultimately reshape our understanding of lion cognition. After reviewing Zubi's history and the complete footage, I believe we're witnessing a case of behavioral plasticity far more sophisticated than previously documented in lions, Dr. Abernathy explained. His early years in inappropriate captivity, while deeply unfortunate from a welfare perspective, created an atypical developmental environment that may have modified his species' typical predatory responses toward humans. Dr. Abernathy pointed to several subtle but significant details visible in the high-resolution security footage. Zubi's ears remained forward rather than flattened during the entire incident. His pupils never dilated to the hunting size typically observed before predatory behavior, and most tellingly, he displayed a slow, blinking pattern that domestic cat behaviorists associate with non-threatening communication. Thursday morning, Emma Morgan spoke about the incident for the first time since being admitted. Her comments came unexpectedly during a scheduled session with Dr. Lydia Fernandez, the child psychologist assigned to her case. Emma described how Zubi had looked directly at her after she fell. His eyes said, "Don't be scared," Emma told Dr. Fernandez, like when Mrs. Phillips, her kindergarten teacher, talks with her eyes when someone is being too loud. Child psychologists recognize that young children often process frightening experiences through metaphor and magical thinking, attributing communication or intention where adults see coincidence. Yet Dr. Fernandez noted something unusual about Emma's interpretation. She wasn't describing fantasy elements like the lion speaking English or promising to protect her. She was specifically referencing nonverbal communication, eye contact, and body language. That's a surprisingly sophisticated observation for a 5-year-old, especially one processing trauma. By Friday, 1 week after the incident, public interest showed no signs of waning. The original videos had been viewed over 50 million times globally. Several wildlife documentary producers had contacted Oakwood requesting permission to develop features about Zubi. Amid this growing media circus, Dr. Hannigan, conducting Zubi's follow-up health check, made a discovery that would eventually provide the most compelling explanation for the lion's behavior during those 17 minutes. "I observed a small, partially healed laceration on his right paw pad," Hannigan documented in his medical notes. Further examination revealed an embedded thorn approximately 2 centimeters in length causing moderate inflammation. This injury likely occurred 3 to 5 days before the incident and would have caused significant discomfort, particularly when bearing weight. This seemingly minor medical finding would eventually support a more pragmatic theory about Zubi's behavior, that physical discomfort had temporarily suppressed normal predatory responses. Yet even this explanation couldn't fully account for the lion's extended period of calm observation rather than aggression or retreat. Saturday morning, Pierre Morgan made an unexpected request. Despite his ongoing recovery and the traumatic associations, he asked to meet with the sanctuary staff. Not for confrontation, but for closure. "I need to understand what happened from their perspective," he explained, "and honestly, I need to see that lion again from a safe distance. There's something unfinished there for me." Wilson arranged a carefully structured private visit for Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after the incident. Emma would remain with her mother, who had taken temporary custody while Pierre recovered. and sanctuary staff would ensure Zubi was secured in his night house during Pierre's visit, allowing him to see the lion through safety glass rather than fencing. I was permitted to accompany Pierre for this extraordinary follow-up. The sanctuary was still closed to the public, creating an eerie quiet as we arrived at 9 o'clock a meter. Pierre navigated the pathways on crutches, moving slowly but purposefully toward the big cat enclosures. Director Wilson and Dr. Hannigan walked with us, providing context and answering Pierre's remarkably detailed questions about sanctuary operations, safety protocols, and Zubi's history. The conversation was notably free of recrimination or defensiveness, a shared exploration of an event that had profoundly affected everyone involved. When we reached the viewing area where the incident had begun, Pierre stopped. For several minutes he simply observed the scene, the now secured maintenance access point, the buffer zone where he had protected his daughter, the habitat beyond. Without the adrenaline and terror of the moment, the physical spaces seemed simultaneously familiar and foreign. "It looks smaller," he finally said. But during those minutes it felt like miles between the fence and safety. When we reached the night viewing area, Pierre steeled himself visibly before looking through the safety glass. Zubi was resting on a raised platform inside, his massive head resting on his paws, eyes half closed in the contentment of a well-fed predator with no immediate needs. "He looks ordinary," Pierre observed after a long moment. "Just a lion being a lion, Doctor." Hannigan nodded. "That's perhaps the most important thing to understand about what happened. Despite everything we're still learning about his behavior that day, Zubi isn't magical or mystical. He's a lion with a specific history, specific circumstances, making specific behavioral choices based on factors we may never fully understand." Pierre remained at the viewing window for nearly 10 minutes, watching Zubi in silence. Quote, "Whatever internal reconciliation he sought seemed to be happening in that quiet observation. When he finally turned away, his expression had softened, some of the hypervigilant tension visibly draining from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said simply to the sanctuary staff, "for saving us and for taking care of him," as we prepared to leave. I asked Pierre whether seeing Zubi again had answered his persistent question about why he hadn't attacked. His response revealed how profoundly the experience had altered his perspective. "I realize now I've been asking the wrong question," he said thoughtfully. "The question isn't why he didn't attack. The question is why we assume attack is the only natural response for a wild animal. Maybe we understand a lot less than we think we do about what's natural for creatures who've had unnatural lives." In May, Dr. Carolyn Abernathy had assembled an interdisciplinary research team to conduct a comprehensive behavioral study of Zubi. The team's preliminary findings, published in the Journal of Comparative Psychology that June, challenged several long-standing assumptions about lion behavior. Their frame-by-frame analysis of the security footage revealed subtle communication cues that had gone unnoticed in initial reviews. This scientific reassessment coincided with significant institutional changes at Oakwood and within the broader sanctuary community. The USDA's final report had identified 7 safety violations at Oakwood, resulting in substantial fines and mandated upgrades. The sanctuary completely redesigned its barrier systems, installed electronic monitoring at all access points, and significantly increased staff to visitor ratios. Throughout the summer, I maintained contact with Pierre as he navigated physical recovery and the complex emotional aftermath of the incident. When I visited their home in late July, 3 months after the incident, Pierre's ankle had healed sufficiently for him to return to teaching summer school. "We're still processing it," Pierre acknowledged. There are nightmares sometimes for both of us, but there's also this strange sense of grace, like we were given this glimpse into something we weren't supposed to see." Emma's recovery had followed a different but equally encouraging trajectory. While initially experiencing heightened anxiety and sleep disturbances, she had responded well to play therapy. Most remarkably, Emma had not developed the fear of animals that medical professionals had initially anticipated. Instead, she had become intensely interested in wildlife behavior. "She's interested in being a veterinarian now," Pierre told me. "She says she wants to help animals like Zubi." In September, 5 months after those 17 minutes that changed so many lives, Oakwood had made the difficult decision to proceed with Zubi's long-planned transfer to the South African sanctuary that represented his final rehabilitation destination. The decision generated mixed emotions among staff who had grown even more attached to Zubi following the incident. The public announcement of Zubi's impending transfer created one final unexpected development. Pierre Morgan contacted Director Wilson with an unusual request. He asked if he and Emma could visit once more before Zubi departed, this time with Emma present under carefully controlled conditions. The request generated significant internal debate among Oakwood staff and consulting psychologists. Some worried about re-traumatizing Emma or creating an unsafe precedent. Others recognized the potential therapeutic value of controlled re-exposure as part of trauma recovery. Ultimately, after extensive consultation with Emma's therapist and sanctuary safety experts, a highly structured visit was arranged. On a clear September morning, 1 week before Zubi's scheduled transport, Pierre and Emma arrived at Oakwood before regular opening hours. The visit had been meticulously planned to prioritize both physical safety and psychological well-being. Zubi had been secured in his night house, visible only through safety glass with multiple additional barriers in place. Emma had been carefully prepared through therapeutic play and age-appropriate explanations. What struck me most as I watched from my designated position was the remarkable normalcy of the scene. Emma, now 6 years old after a summer birthday, behaved like any child visiting a wildlife sanctuary. Curious, occasionally distracted, asking questions that bounced between profound insight and childish fancy. When they reached the viewing area where Zubi could be seen through the safety glass, Emma grew quiet, studying the lion with intense concentration. Zubi, who had been resting on his platform, raised his head as if sensing their presence, his amber eyes scanning the viewing area with casual interest. "He looks bigger than I remembered," Emma said after a moment, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet morning air. Pierre knelt beside her, their eyes at the same level. "Does seeing him make you feel scared?" Emma considered this with the directness unique to children. "A little," she admitted, "but also not really. He's just a lion being a lion." "Like Doctor," James said, the echo of Doctor. Hannigan's words from Pierre's previous visit wasn't lost on those present. Somehow this simple acknowledgement that Zubi was neither monster nor miracle, but simply a lion with his own experiences and instincts, represented the most honest integration of what had happened that April day. They remained at the viewing area for about 10 minutes, Emma occasionally asking questions that Dr. Hannigan answered with age-appropriate accuracy. Before leaving, Emma surprised everyone by placing her hand against the glass and saying simply, "Goodbye, Zubi. Have a good trip to Africa." The lion, of course, couldn't understand the words. Yet, as if responding to some subtler communication, he rose from his platform, stretched with feline deliberation, and moved closer to the glass, his massive head now just feet from where Emma stood safely on the other side of multiple barriers. For a brief moment, their eyes met in a gaze reminiscent of that April day, though now mediated by appropriate safety measures. Then, with the casual indifference characteristic of his species, Zubi turned away, returning to his platform and resuming his rest. The moment of connection, if that's what it had been, passed as naturally as it had arrived. 1 week later, Zubi was successfully transported to the South African sanctuary where he would live out his remaining years in a spacious habitat alongside other rescued lions. The Oakwood Wildlife Sanctuary continued its important rehabilitation work with enhanced safety measures and a deeper commitment to educational outreach. Dr. Abernathy's research team published additional findings that influenced both sanctuary management practices and theoretical understandings of predator cognition. As for Pierre and Emma Morgan, they gradually returned to the rhythm of ordinary life. School days, weekend activities, the modest celebrations and challenges that constitute most human experience. The incident remained part of their story, neither denied nor permitted to define them. They had encountered one of nature's most powerful predators in circumstances that defied conventional outcomes and emerged with a perspective that few humans ever achieve. A glimpse across the species divide that revealed both the genuine danger and the unexpected. Complexity of our relationship with the wild world. In journalism, we're trained to seek definitive conclusions, to tie narratives into neat packages with clear causes and effects, lessons learned, and justice served. The story of Emma, Pierre, and Zubi resists such simplification. It remains at its core an encounter between species whose experiences and perceptions of the world differ in ways we can never fully bridge. The miracle at Oakwood wasn't that a lion somehow chose to spare a human child. The miracle was the moment of suspended expectation that allowed us to see beyond our assumptions about what must happen when human vulnerability meets predator power. Perhaps the most fitting conclusion came from Pierre himself during our final conversation before this article went to press. "Why do we keep trying to write simple stories about complex things?" he observed as we discussed the various narratives that had emerged around the incident. "The truth is always messier and more interesting than the stories we tell." Zubi didn't save Emma, he just didn't attack her for reasons we'll never fully understand. And somehow that's enough of a miracle.